Roman legend says the city was founded in 753 BC by Romulus and Remus, two brothers who were abandoned as infants and raised by a she-wolf. The two brothers set out to build their own city on the banks of the Tiber River. But a disagreement over who would rule it ended in murder. Remus was killed at the hands of Romulus, for whom the city of Rome is named.
Vanished culture of the Etruscans. By centuries, Etruria emerged out of prehistoric Italy about 900 years before the birth of Christ. They dominated central Italy in the area that is now modern Tuscany, Latium, and Umbria. But their greatest legacy is perhaps the city of Rome itself. In the 6th century BC, Etruscan kings fortified the city, paved the Forum, created a master sewer system, and built some of the most majestic structures.
The man who reshaped Roman society was an Etruscan king called Servius Tullius. All Servius Tullius did was carry out history's first census. In the 6th century BC, the census detailed every Roman's obligations to the city, to obey its laws, pay taxes, and do military service. But much more important, it also gave them rights. This was the great innovation of Servius. In proportion to their contribution, Romans were given a say in how their city was run. Servius sowed the seeds of representational government. He organized an assembly to govern the city and gave it a name, the Senate. His reforms laid the foundations for Rome's greatest achievement, the creation of the Republic. Romans vowed they would never again live under a king. So how exactly were they going to live? How would they govern themselves? Their solution was momentous. They declared that the affairs of Rome would belong to the people, that citizens would vote, and that Rome would be a res publica, a public affair, a republic. Government would no longer be the business of kings. Rome would be was the republic's banner. Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome. It was the ancient world's first representational government.
The ideal path was cleared. A broad trench was dug and filled in with sand and boulders to form a solid foundation. Next went a layer of gravel compacted with clay or mortar. The top surface was a layer of thick paving stones angled to allow the water to drain off to the side. Caesar's reign was a major turning point in Rome's political history. His conquest of Gaul greatly expanded the reach of Roman influence. His consolidation of power marked the death of the Roman Republic, ruled by democratically elected senators and consuls, and the birth of an empire in which tyrannical emperors could rule with On the upstream side, the piles leaned in the direction of the current. 40 feet downstream, the corresponding piles leaned against the current. Each set of piles was joined by a long connecting beam 2 feet thick. Lengths of timber were then laid across the beams, and the surface was finished with tightly wrapped bundles of sticks. The design of the bridge itself was innovative, but what made this engineering feat even more astounding is the speed with which it was built. Just 10 days after ordering its construction. By the time of Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, Rome controlled most of Western Europe and North Africa. It had defeated Carthage a century earlier, making it the Mediterranean world's lone superpower. Caesar's eventual successor was his great-nephew Octavian, who was renamed Augustus and crowned Rome's first imperator, or emperor. Under Augustus, the Roman road network expanded to reach the farthest corners of the empire. And with the highways paved, it was time to build new destinations.
Under Augustus, we can see popping up everywhere Roman-style cities equipped with a forum, with a theater, with an amphitheater, with a basilica.
Rome's engineers had a secret weapon that enabled them to build bigger, stronger, and faster than anyone else. Waterproof concrete, mixed with a volcanic sand called pozzolana. It was the disfigured, stuttering Emperor Claudius who arguably had the greatest impact on Rome's water supply. Before he assumed power, Claudius had been a royal laughingstock who was considered an invalid and even hidden from the public eye. During the reign of Claudius, the empire took several surprising steps forward. On the frontier, his legions conquered Britannia, something even Julius Caesar failed to do. And back home, he built two major aqueducts, the Aqua Claudia and the Anio Novus, which dramatically increased the amount of water flowing into Rome. The Romans engineered their aqueducts to approach the city on a gradual declining angle, or gradient. That gradient was just several inches every 100 feet. To maintain the water's precise descent through high mountains, Roman engineers dug perfectly angled tunnels through them. When the pipelines reached low valleys, they were elevated on stone walls. If the walls needed to be higher than 6.5 feet off the ground, the Romans saved building materials while still adding strength by perfecting an ancient engineering concept, the arch. Arches were built around a temporary wooden framework that held each stone in place until the keystone was laid in the center. The keystone evenly distributed weight down each side of the arch, allowing builders to stack additional stones above it. By the end of the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire extended from England to Egypt and from Portugal to Persia. Construction on the Colosseum began in 72 AD. It was financed by the sale of precious relics taken from the Jewish temple during Vespasian's sacking of Jerusalem. 12,000 Jewish captives were brought back from that campaign to build the amphitheater. They poured more than 6,000 tons of concrete and hauled huge travertine building blocks to the site from a quarry 20 miles away. Roman amphitheaters were constructed from a surprisingly simple framework, incorporating 2 Greek theaters back to back to form one 360-degree theater in the round. It contained an intricate network of corridors and staircases that could shuffle 70,000 Romans in and out in record time. It had 110 drinking fountains and 2 restrooms, large enough to accommodate a packed house. The Colosseum even had a retractable roof. On hot days, an awning called a velarium was unfurled above the upper deck to shade spectators from the sun. It was operated by sailors from the Roman Navy, who were stationed around the top of the Colosseum's arcade. Several ancient writers describe live naval battles recreated right in the middle of the arena, with battleships on water.
We do have evidence due to recent studies of the Colosseum that show there are plenty of channels, water channels, for flooding the substructures of the Colosseum. So yes, it was possible, and yes, it happened.
The column's exact height holds a more subtle significance.
The height of Trajan's column itself, 100 feet, with the addition of the base and a statue on top of that, marked the height of the side of the Quirinal Hill, which was removed to create the Forum.
Trajan's Forum stood for 700 years. Most of it was reduced to rubble by a 9th century earthquake. While Trajan's Forum next door was a lavish haven for the city's elite.
The opulence of the Forum, its colonnaded forecourt, its gilded decorations represented a tremendous formal center for the city. Right next to that, the brick architecture of the side of the Quirinal Hill, which was removed to create the Forum at that spot. Therefore, it becomes a marker not only of the battles of Trajan, but also the battles of Apollodorus to clear the land and create this monumental urban space.
But there is one surviving section that leaves no doubt about its imposing scale, a vast complex known as Trajan's Market. Apollodorus shored up the 125-foot cliff face he had created by form-fitting a 6-story Roman shopping mall directly into the hillside. He ingeniously shaped the first 3 levels in a hemicycle, a semicircular structure with long, curved corridors of storefronts.
The markets functioned to reinforce the hillside, which had just been carved out.
Above the hemicycle were 3 more levels, with units ranging from small shops to great 3-storied halls. Trajan's Market contained over 150 individual storefronts that might have supplied everything from footwear to fine art. His market was engineered as a main street for the masses.
The market center for the city. Right next to that, the brick architecture of the marketplace, very commonplace in the city for the daily lives of the Roman citizenry.
Hadrian put his legions to work on the most ambitious fortification ever conceived by a Roman. A towering 73-mile defensive wall across the entire country. 15 feet high, with parapets rising an additional 6 feet above that. A 9-foot ditch was dug at its base, forcing potential invaders to make a 30-foot climb before coming face to face with the Roman legions on the other side. And if invaders did miraculously make it over the wall and past the Roman guards, they had one last obstacle to slow their advance, the Vallum, a 120-foot wide ditch that ran behind the wall from coast to coast. Hadrian's Wall was as much a psychological barrier as a physical one. Its monstrous, unending facade served as an unnerving reminder of Rome's indisputable dominance. Every Roman mile, the legions built a guard post into the wall called a mile castle, which housed up to 60 troops at a time. Between each mile castle stood 2 smaller watchtowers, where sentries kept a constant eye on the borderland. And along the length of the wall, 17 enormous superforts were built that could house 1,000 Roman soldiers. Around these forts, towns sprung up to satisfy the army's constant demand for food and supplies. In just 5 years, Hadrian's vast barrier across Britain was complete. The emperor had secured Rome's northwest border, improved discipline within his ranks. In the rubble of the old ruin, he commissioned his most famous structure, the Pantheon, a majestic temple to the Roman gods. The Rotunda, a huge interior space capped by a magnificent dome ceiling, was the heart of the Pantheon's design. At its center, the concrete dome rises nearly 150 feet. It spans exactly the same length across without any support from columns or buttresses. The Pantheon's dome would remain the largest unsupported concrete span in the world for 18 centuries. Before Hadrian's engineers could start pouring the dome's concrete ceiling, they needed to figure out how to direct its weight away from its center. Otherwise, when they removed the wooden framework holding the ceiling in place, 3,000 tons of concrete would collapse under its own weight. The Pantheon's engineers developed several radical solutions to make sure its ceiling and the emperor's reputation wouldn't come crashing down. First, they built a solid base of walls 20 feet thick to act as a foundation for the ceiling. Next, as the ceiling rose toward its apex, they mixed in lighter materials with the cement and poured a progressively thinner layer of it.
Roman
Ceiling
concrete
even lighter, the builders molded recessed panels called coffers into the ceiling, which served 2 ingenious purposes. A final weight-shedding alteration immediately became the Pantheon's most distinctive feature: the oculus, a 30-foot wide hole in the center of the ceiling. The oculus eliminates the stress of heavy concrete at the dome's weakest point, and it lights up the interior like the sun does the earth. There are no surviving records to reveal the architect's identity, but modern speculation centers on Emperor Hadrian himself. Another potential candidate is Apollodorus of Damascus, the genius behind the forum built by Hadrian's predecessor, Trajan. Apollodorus was skeptical of Hadrian's architectural skills and bold enough to declare it publicly. For centuries, baths had been an integral part of daily life in Rome. They centered around an arrangement of hot and cold pools. But the baths were more than just a place to bathe. They were country clubs open to people of every class. Baths had always been a popular construction project among Roman emperors. Previous rulers like Nero, Titus, and Trajan had each built extravagant baths in their own name. And Caracalla was determined to trump them all with the most massive bath complex ever built.
Swimming pools the size of Olympic pools. There were bathing pools at different temperatures, private bathing rooms, and areas where people could mix and mingle.
The central building was larger than St. Peter's Basilica and trimmed from stem to stern in gold and marble. Its floors were covered with intricate mosaics, fragments of which still remain. Surrounding the main building were open spaces for track and field events, Separate buildings containing libraries, shops, restaurants, and even brothels lined the perimeter. The complex could comfortably accommodate nearly 2,000 Romans at a time.
This small town would have been heaving with people every day. These enormous rooms are a testament.
Caracalla's laborers worked overtime to complete his baths quickly.
To build such a magnificent bathing facility in 5 years, there would have been between 5,000 and 10,000 people.
The buildings seen above ground were just half of the story. Beneath the complex, a water channel tunneled from a nearby aqueduct diverted 5 million gallons of fresh water into the baths every day. Water for the hot pools was diverted to furnaces, where it was heated over wood fires. As many as 50 such furnaces were built directly beneath the floor. The baths of Caracalla opened in 216 AD. They were one of the last great feats of Roman engineering, combining all the skills the Romans had perfected over the centuries. Caracalla hemorrhaged more cash on costly invasions of Parthia and Armenia, eastern regions not controlled by a Roman emperor since Trajan a century earlier. A devastating fire gutted the Colosseum and the soul of the capital. The amphitheater would be rebuilt 20 years later, but the empire itself would never recover. In the 5th and 6th centuries, Germanic warrior tribes repeatedly sacked Rome, demanding land and money. In 537, an invading tribe went right for the jugular, destroying the city's most vital life-sustaining arteries, its aqueducts.
Present is an entire list of Roman Empire rulers in chronological order. These rulers belong to different dynasties from time to time. Emperors from Julius Caesar to Nero belonged to Claudian dynasty. The 5 good emperors during 96 to 192 AD belonged to Antoine dynasty. Caracalla was of Severan and Diocletian. The emperor, when Roman Empire split up, was of Constantian dynasty. In 395 AD, Roman Empire split into 2 empires. Roman Empire split up because of many reasons. It was getting difficult to manage the empire effectively. The provinces were putting a great financial strain on Rome. When the old emperors died, the army selected General Diocletian to be the new emperor of Rome. Diocletian separated and enlarged the empire's civil and military services and reorganized the empire's provincial divisions, establishing the largest and most bureaucratic government in the history of the empire. After some thought, Emperor Diocletian decided the only thing to do with Rome was to split the empire in half. That way, it would be easier to manage. This created 2 Roman empires, the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire included the city of Rome. The Eastern Roman Empire included the city of Byzantium. Following the list of the Roman emperors of the Western and Eastern Empires, facing numerous invasions, the Western Roman Empire witnessed its final dissolution on 4 September 476 AD. Romulus Augustulus being the last Roman emperor of Western province. The Eastern Roman Empire was going through a different trajectory as it declined steadily after 1000 AD to 1453 with the fall of Constantinople to the Turks. Hence is the fall of Roman civilization.